Hi guys, welcome to the Watch Hobbyist channel. So firstly I just want to apologise for the lack of reviews of late. It's purely because I've been so busy with work, but I've now finally renovated my office and I've also got a bit of a studio set up. So providing you with reviews and things like that is going to be much more common now. I've got some great watches coming up, so make sure you hit that subscribe button, make sure you hit the bell icon as well so you're notified when I bring out a new video. And also check out my Instagram, because Instagram's a great way of me showing you all my latest watches, and I always try and show them in an interesting manner. So check out @WatchHobbyist on Instagram, just search for that and subscribe and you'll be able to see all that as well. Now, why is this watch close to my heart? So when I was about 10 years old, I bought my first G-Shock, and I remember exactly where I bought it from. It's about 2 miles from my house, if not less right now. And I absolutely love that watch. I loved it so much that I kept it. I've still got it. All the resin has fallen to bits because it gets brittle over time and it all comes off and falls to bits, but the watch itself, the module, is still working and they just last forever. So I've always loved G-Shocks. Ended up where I collected them more and more throughout my high school. I remember every time I'd go on holiday I'd be straight to the nearest shops looking for a Casio G-Shock if I could afford it. My mum, bless her, she barely earned anything back in those days, and she would always try and buy me one if I saw one that I really liked. But these watches, you know, they were part of my childhood, and I think that's why I love them so much. And for me, they're as much of a classic watch as a Rolex Submariner or an Omega Speedmaster, anything like that. You know, obviously they're not in the same sort of class or level, but they are a true classic watch, and they're a classless watch as well. You see all sorts of people wearing them. Now, the great thing about these steel ones is that they're a modern take and a more smart version of a basic Casio G-Shock. So that is why I've compared them in the review. I'm going to compare them to sort of my other G-Shocks. I'm going to compare them to the Apple Watch as well, which I own. Yes, I do own an Apple Watch, but I'm actually going to review that in a separate review soon, because I think it's important to talk about watches like that are changing the landscape a little bit. But this G-Shock is a full steel case, so it's a steel bezel outside, it's a steel case inside, and then it has a steel case back which screws in. There have been some reports saying that there's a plastic in a case, but it's not, it's steel. So I really want to look at this watch in depth. The review is going to be long. I'm sorry it's so long, but I think it's a good way of restarting the channel, and you can always skip bits. This bit, for example, I've probably waffled on and off. So let's jump into the review. Let's have a look at what the watch is like and how it compares to others. Okay, so what I quickly want to do is just look at the packaging. I'm not doing an unboxing or anything like that, but you'll see that the steel version actually comes in what is pretty much a generic G-Shock case. It's the typical tin design, and it just has a few bits inside it to protect the watch during transit. They're also pretty good for traveling with those. You can put any watch in those and they're pretty good. They'll protect it quite nicely, because obviously you've got some nice protection around there. But box, manual, tags, bit of a tin box, and that's your lot. With the gold one, I'll just pop those over there a sec. You do have more to the box than this, but I just thought I'd show you in this state. So on the actual lid itself, it's gold, it's brushed gold, and it shows G-Shock 35th anniversary. Inside the case as well, it says G-Shock 35th anniversary. It's got the 35 and the G-Shock logo. So they do that sort of every 5 years. We have 30, 25 and all that. And it's always a very similar look. But in this case, obviously, it's 35 years since the original G-Shock, 1983. And here we have, although actually it was 1982, I believe, was one of the first ones. But I'm not going to go into the history of the Casio G-Shock. But 35th anniversary. So here's the gold one. It comes in this much bigger box. You in here have all the documentation, so you do still get all that. But then if we have to look at the watches themselves, there are some real key differences as well with the actual watches. So it's not just simply one is gold, one is steel. For starters, if you look at the gold one, what's nice is they've gone as far as actually showing like a gold screws and gold buttons. So we have, I'm just trying to get that to focus, but there's basically gold screws, gold buttons to the actual clasp. The inside of the clasp as well is gold plated. Everything is gold plated, by the way. It's not solid gold. Don't be thinking this is an actual solid gold G-Shock. I wish it was, actually. I think that'd be pretty cool. But this is all gold plated, but it works really well. And the other thing as well is if you look just to the inside of the bezel, you can see that it's gold all around the bezel on the inside as well. So you've got the black area that surrounds the actual display, but then you've also got this gold area surrounding that that's just on the inner side of the bezel. But the steel one, that actually doesn't have anything going on here other than just a black scenario going on within the inner bezel. So that's just black around the LCD. And then on in terms of the screws, then we have steel ones, we have steel screws, steel buttons, we have the steel clasp completely with the steel inner clasp as well. And then the other difference that I've noticed as well is that we have on the back here, we have shock resistant, Casio shock resistant written on the back of the watch. It's quite a vintage style font as well. So that works quite nicely. I think it's quite a nice colour and everything going on, quite a nice font. Whereas the gold one on the back, that's a little bit different. So that actually says it's got the 35 logo basically. So what we've seen on the packaging is carried across. I think it looks really cool actually, and that's why there is a very good chance I will be keeping this. You will see that it's in all its packaging and I've not taken any of that off, which is why it's being terribly reflective on the camera. But the main reason that I've kept it in that packaging just for now is that I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. I have a lot of watches. Will I actually wear this? They're going for a premium at the moment, and although I hate that secondary market, you know, sometimes when you've got something, it's tempting to make the most of that. But there is a very good chance that this will actually stay, because I'm such a massive G-Shock fan that I'll never get another one of these without paying a massive premium myself. They'll probably only go up in value in the future. They're already going for silly money at the moment. They'll only go for more silly money down the line. So it's really nice to be able to enjoy something like this. But I've left it in the packaging just for now. And as a result of me leaving it in the packaging, I'm actually going to review the steel one today more. But at least you've seen the differences with the gold one. There's no other real differences, such as the backlight. That's all the same. There's sometimes logos within the backlight on certain G-Shocks and stuff, but everything else is absolutely identical, you know, apart from the actual just the aesthetics of the watch. So I'm going to pop this one down. I'm going to get the steel one. We're going to have a look at that, and I'll also show you things like the bracelet in a bit more depth. Okay, so we've got the steel one. I'm going to show you the bracelet first, because then I'm going to go into the functionality of the watch, and I'm going to show you how it works with your smartphone as well. But if I just pop the watch down there, you'll see that these are the links that I've removed from the bracelet. So these are from the same watch, the actual links. And what I wasn't sure about was going to be the quality of the bracelet. So I've seen some terrible cheap Casio bracelets in the past. I've got an edifice which I sometimes wear for work, and actually, you know, I can't say that the quality of that bracelet is particularly any good, but in this case the quality does seem better. You've got polished areas, you've got brushed areas, and there is a good bit of weight to it as well. It's not so heavy, this watch, that it's going to cause, you know, any aching of the wrist sort of after a day or two's wear, but there is still a substantial weight that, you know, enough that it feels like a quality product, and so it should do for the price that you are paying for it. But obviously weight always translates into how a product feels. If something weighs very little, it sometimes feels cheap and nasty, which isn't always the case. Obviously we have things like titanium, but in this case we have steel, and I just think it's a really good balance that they've struck. It's not hollow links by the feel of it, but it also, you know, feels like it's going to last. And it's not too heavy. But the interesting thing for me with this bracelet setup is actually the way that the links are held together. So on some watches you would have a pin and tube system that goes right across, and that's normally the case with bracelets from Casio. You normally have this pin and tube system. Now I've never seen the effects of age on a pin and tube Casio, but I have seen it on watches like Omega Seamasters, where you actually, over the time, they sort of stretch the bracelets, and you end up where the pin and tube sort of stretches as well, and it ends up where sometimes links can literally just fall out of your watch. So it's always worth sort of keeping an eye on watches like that. But in this case, Casio have gone a little bit of a different route. So I have here a little removal tool, which, you know, you can get in any sort of Christmas cracker. It's really not anything special, but it's just a little pin, and I'll show you how it works. So you would basically put your little pin tool in the end of the link, and you push it, and then you just sort of push the link up, and you end up where it separates like that. And what you actually have, if my camera will hopefully focus, is a tiny little spring bar. So the ends of this bar are actually springy, just like you would get on the links, the end links of a lot of watches, and then that goes into two holes which are inside, and that's how it works. So I have no idea how that's going to hold up. It feels quite tough and quite solid, and it feels easily as good as any sort of pin and tube system I've seen, but I have no idea because obviously I've only had the watch a few days. Now, in terms of durability of the bracelet overall, that's a slightly different matter, because I received this watch only a few days ago and I have already scratched it. The clasp, if we look at the clasp, sorry I moved the camera then, but if we look at the clasp, I'm not sure if it will show up in this light, but just at the bottom end here, I've got some burring going on, some scratch marks. And that's because the other day I was out in the garden, I was pulling trees up and everything, just sort of sorting the garden out. We finally got some sunny weather here. And I wore this watch just to really see how it would be affected by sort of day-to-day, you know, odd jobs around the house, and am I going to scratch it or anything like that? And the answer, I'm afraid, is yes. So I have learned on your behalf that you can definitely scratch this watch, and of course I expected that. It's a steel watch. I've scratched all my other steel watches probably as well. Gold watches are even softer, they're even easier to scratch, but that's why you buy a G-Shock, is you don't really care too much about its condition, and it doesn't bother me at all that I've scratched this. If you're really OCD, then yes, you'll probably be better with a resin one where, you know, you're not really going to mark that too badly, because it just sort of self-heals. But with a steel watch, it's just like any other watch, you're going to scratch it. Some watches do have coatings, so you have Seiko where they have the sort of shield coating on the top, and that's fine, that's great, but Casio don't do that. Which means that we have to chat about the polished versus brushed scenario. And obviously we have this polished section here, which is very in your face. Now, I have considered should I brush that, but I think I like to leave things original. So for now, certainly I've held off from giving that a go with something like a Gary Flex block, or I know some people use Brillo pads and things like they would wash pans and pots and pans with, but I don't really fancy giving that a go on a several £100 watch, to be honest. So I'm probably going to leave this as it is. I do actually like that you have the polished section that goes into a brushed bezel. I think if they'd left the bezel polished, that would have just been overkill. But I think the fact that that's polished and it's sandwiched between the sort of brushed end link here of the bracelet and the brushed bezel itself, I think it sort of works really nicely, to be honest. I think as a result of that, I'm probably going to leave it how it is. The rest of the bracelet is pretty much brushed apart from these sort of dotted areas. But really, all this is a metal version, in terms of its looks, of a watch like this. So this is a GMW-B5000. This is a more classic model. This is a modern version of it, which is why it looks like it does. You can still get the GMW-B5600E, which is a much more classic model and looks very similar to the first G-Shocks that were available many years ago. But you know, as a result of them making it steel, they've just given it a completely different look. But certainly that it doesn't end there. There are massive differences between these two watches, and I'm going to show you that with the functionality. But the next thing I'd like to look at is actually the iPhone or smartphone capabilities of the new watch. So I'm going to get my phone out, I'm going to bring up the app and show you which app to download, and I'm going to have a look at how it interacts with the watch. Okay, so I've jumped into the app that's on my phone, which is the App Store, and that's where you download the apps, obviously, for the iPhone. I've got an iPhone 10. I would imagine if you've got any other kind of iPhone, then it's going to be exactly the same. If you've got an Android phone, I'm not exactly sure if it looks the same, but I'm pretty sure it does. We have two options here. Once I've searched for G-Shock, I've got G-Shock Connected and I've got G-Shock Plus. G-Shock Plus is for the older Bluetooth watches, so we don't want that one. We want G-Shock Connected. it's a red and black logo, which hopefully you can see, and I've already downloaded it and I've actually disconnected the watch. So I'd already set it up, I've disconnected it, and we're going to go into that now. I'm going to press open, and this is how the app looks. Okay, so we have this sort of black facade to it, and it's telling us where to find the model number of our watch. So if you look on the back, you'll find the model number, and of course in this case we are looking for, at the bottom, the GMW-B5000. So if I press that, okay, now what it does is it tells me how to connect. So I'm going to hold this bottom left connect button for 3 seconds. So I'm going to place the phone down there, and you'll actually see that the phone does indeed change. It sort of reacts to the watch. So if I hold down that button, the bottom left button, I'm holding it and holding it, it makes beeps. I let go of it. So we can see it's found the watch there. I'm going to press the red button there, and then we get that screen there, which shows that it's connecting to the watch. The watch is still saying connect. Registration was successful, so that's fine. And now this is how I've got my watch set up. So the world time zones I've set up. I'm going to go into that in a second. So at the bottom of the app, you actually have tabs, and we start off with guide. So instead of carrying your instruction manual with you, which I very much doubt you're going to do, we have a guide, and then we have world time. So that's what I was looking at before. You can customize this yourself. So what's really good about this is that you can set 5 world time zones that mean something to you, and that's great because instead of having the 48 or so that are on other G-Shocks and you have to cycle right through them, you just have 5 to cycle through, which I'm sure is more than enough for most people. You can also go onto world time to home time, and you can actually press that, and if you press that, it will actually ask you which you want to switch over, and it will switch between home time and local time. So if you were in Madrid and you press that sort of arrow button there, that would actually switch between London, which is my home time, and the Madrid time. So it just works really, really nicely. It means that when you land on a plane or whatever, you can just press the button and it will just do it all automatically for you without having to go into the watch and set things up. And if you actually click on a time, so say we click on UTC there, we can then, so say we want to change UTC as one of the world time zones to something completely different. So you get this map come up, and you can see it's showing the UTC time zone area. But what we want to do is we want to search for a city. So we're going to scroll up and just pick any random one. So we've got Zagreb there. Okay, so Zagreb in Croatia. Okay, the home time there is currently 25 to 5 in the afternoon. It's showing me it's UTC +2, and it's got daylight savings time scenario there. I could press that red button, and that would actually send that to the watch. So that's how the Bluetooth sort of interacts with the watch here. You can have different, in that case, you can have different world time zones going on. The next thing as well is time and place. Now, if you've had a G-Shock before, now certainly this one has a time memo function. So I was just looking for it then, but there's a time memo function that I can hold one of these buttons down, and it will actually remember the time. So it will create like a stamp, basically. That watch is a watch that I bought in Tokyo, and it's one of the reasons why I bought it, because back in the day when I used to work in a different manner to how I do now, one of the things I would do when I would arrive with a client is actually stamp the time, so I'd know what time I got there. But now I tend to use stopwatches and things like that. The difference with this watch is that when you timestamp, so basically the watch stamps the time and date into the memory, but it can also now interact with the phone and use the GPS of the phone. So obviously there's no GPS in the watch, but it can use the GPS of the phone to know where that timestamp was created. So it might come in handy occasionally for very few people, but it's just something else that it does. If I then pop the watch back down and we go back into here and we go into utility, we can set alarms. So we can choose which one of the 5 alarms we want to change. We've also got a hourly signal we can turn on. We've got timer. We can literally set a 24-hour timer there, dead easy, just like you would on your own phone, in fact. So whether it's useful, I don't know, but maybe you're somewhere where you can't take your phone with you. Maybe you go to the gym and you leave the phone at home or in your locker whatever. So you've got your watch with you, and it was just quicker to set the timer on here maybe. That's one option for it. And then you've got reminder as well, which is another thing which you can actually go into reminders. You can set up to 5 of them, and it's like an alarm with you can basically put characters in there, things like that. So whether it's useful, I'm not 100%, but you can do that. So that's a benefit to some people, I'm sure. But all this is another reason why I'm actually going to compare this watch a bit to the Apple Watch later in the review. I know this review is going to get on a long time, so I'm sorry it's taking so long, but there's a lot to talk about with a watch like this. It has so much going on. But they are going some way, as you can see, to create a kind of hybrid smartwatch. This is by no means as featured as an Apple Watch in my opinion, but if you don't want an Apple Watch and you want something tough and rugged that's got some of the feature set, then you've basically got something here that's very different. If you then go into the settings app, we now have access to the settings of the watch. So we can click on the watch. We've got tutorials and things like that. We've got settings for the phone finder as well. So you can actually choose how loud the alarm is for when you're trying to find your phone. I'm going to show you that shortly, and also the type of ringtone that it actually makes when it does that, because the phone actually has to make a noise to alert you where the phone is. So all that's coming from here anyway. You've also got your watch display settings, your 12 and 24 hour display, whether you want the day first or the month first in the date, which I think is really nice, because you guys in the US, you have month then day, and in the UK we have day then month. And on G-Shocks, such as I don't know, this one here, you can see this watch says 5/8, but a lot of watches would say 8/5 for the 8th of May. So on this watch, on the steel watch, I can now change that. So I have that ability to customize it. So not a big thing, but you know, for us folks over in the other side of the pond, it's something you can choose how you like it. You've got the option to set the sounds, so whether it's going to operate the sounds of the watch at all. So currently the watch is actually set to make a beep every time I press the button, say through the modes or whatever. But if I press this here and I press send to watch, setting completed, and now when I cycle through the modes on my watch, it's not going to make those sounds anymore. We've then got time adjustment, so I can adjust the time from here, but obviously it's going to automatically do it via either the phone or through the multiband 6 atomic operation. We've got light settings, so there's an auto light feature on this watch, which is really cool, and when it does that, you can choose whether it's either 2 seconds or 4 seconds, and you can choose whether it comes on automatically or if you have to press the button to activate it. You've also got power saving settings. So that's whether the screen will turn off at night. So between 10 PM and 6 AM, if it's dark in the situation that you're in, whether it's maybe your bedroom at night, whatever, it will actually turn the screen off completely on the watch, and it will save the power. Therefore, the watch is solar powered, but obviously it does utilize power. So you are enabling the power reserve to be longer if you actually end up sort of, you know, turning it into power save mode. So I do keep it in power save mode. And then finally you've got things like DST and all that sort of stuff, whether it's automatic or not. Don't really know why you wouldn't want it to be automatic, but you can choose that. So that's the app. That's how the app works. I'm going to jump into the actual functions of the watch now. Okay, so here's the watch. I'm going to look at the functions now. First of all, I wanted to look at the time display. So this is what you're going to see when you look down at the watch. Most of the time, it's going to have the day, the date, and the time. The date, as I say, can be formatted in either month then day or day then month. But we also have some little abbreviations going on above the day. We've got PS, which is power save. That's the option we were talking about before, between 10 PM and 6 AM. That's when the screen goes off to save battery power. Then we also have LT. Now the LT is to show that the automatic light is activated. So if I wanted to, I could press the top right button and that actually activates the light. You might be able to see it there, I'm not too sure. But automatically, when it's dark enough, now it won't do it in here right now because it's too bright, but you would basically flick your wrist and that actually activates the light. Now, that has been seen before on many G-Shocks, but what's different about this one is you'll notice with the overlay, it actually fades in and fades out. It doesn't just come on and go off, it fades, kind of like a luxury car. It just looks really nice. It's just an extra thought, an extra feature. It's not going to change anybody's life, but it just looks really, really good when it comes on. Then we've got RCVD. So RCVD is received. That shows it's actually received the atomic time signal and updated the time on the watch to be as accurate as possible. So good to go there. And then the DST, that's the daylight savings time. Right, so the first mode that we're going to jump into is the world time mode. Now you'll see that before, when I was playing with the phone settings, I actually changed the beep to not activate. So when I go into this mode, it shouldn't beep. So if I press the button now at the lower left, yeah, there's no beep. You'll see here it tells me which city it's currently set to on the world time zone. I've got Madrid set currently. If I wanted to recall that, I would press the top left and it says Madrid again. Then Madrid jumps to the home time, which is currently nearly 10 to 4 in the afternoon here in the UK, but it's 10 to 5 in Madrid. They're 1 hour ahead. If I want to cycle through my 5 world time zones, I would go bottom right button, and Tokyo's 4th, Sydney is 5th, and it's basically giving me UTC. You know, I'm just scrolling through. Now, one thing that I have noticed is that Sydney is a day ahead, sort of thing. They're into the next day now, so that doesn't tell me whether it's 10 to 1 in the morning today or 10 to 1 in the morning tomorrow there. So you do have to be aware with this watch of things like that. So that's the only sort of thing with that. I think it lacks a little bit on the world time features in regards to that. The next thing we have is the alarm. So we've seen that in the phone we can set those automatically, but we can also set them on the watch, and we can scroll through to 1, 2, 3, 4 and then snooze. Snooze is literally a snooze alarm, so if you use the snooze one, it will keep going off until you press a specific set of buttons to turn it off, whereas if you just hit a button on any of the others, it won't come back on. In terms of the beep, I'm going to put the watch next to the microphone. That's as loud as it gets, so it's not intrusive. Some ways that's good, but it's also, if you're a dead sleeper like me, it's probably not going to wake you up too easily. But it is an alarm, and it's no louder or quieter than any other G-Shock I've ever had. As I tend to use G-Shocks as travel watches, if you ever have like an afternoon nap, it does wake you up quite nicely, so that's not a bad thing. It's not too loud, and like my phone sometimes goes off and I nearly fall out of bed because it's that loud. If I then go to the next one, we've got stopwatch. Now I think this is actually only a 60-minute stopwatch, but I could be wrong. I've just not had time to actually check up on that, so I'll try and put an overlay for you, whether it's 12-hour, 24-hour or 60-minute. But if we hit the start button at the bottom right, we get milliseconds to the 100th of a second, we get the seconds, and we get the minutes. We can then stop it with the same button. If I start it again, I think I pressed the top right. No, sorry, I pressed the top left, and that's a split time. The top right activates the light. So if you're timing laps and things like that, then you have the split options. You can just press that again, I guess, and that keeps it going. And then we can stop it with the bottom right, reset it with the top left. Go into the next mode, bottom left, that's the timer. That is a 24-hour timer. You can set that in the phone or on the watch itself, and then we're back to the time. So not a smart watch by any means, but it does have the capability to adjust via your phone, and therefore a different take on a smartwatch, perhaps, I would say. Now, the next thing I'd like to do is actually compare it to some of my other G-Shocks, and then I'm comparing it to probably the Apple Watch as well. Okay, so one thing I want to do is I want to compare it to a couple of my other G-Shocks. So there are some G-Shocks out there that have become true classics. This is obviously very much themed on one of them, which is the GMW-5600 size of G-Shock. This is one of the watches that you can buy today, but it actually looks very similar in size to the very original models, although these are plastic. They have a plastic case inside a removable bezel, which can actually be screwed on or off sort of thing. So I'm just going to remove that focus option. And then we have like a screwed in case back, so you can literally just sort of screw that case back in with actual screws, versus the G-Shock we see here, the metal one, where it has an actual case back that's got notches in it to actually screw a whole piece into a metal case rather than a plastic case. So that's the difference in terms of you know, sort of looks with the watch. The basics of the function, the functions and the module inside are very different, as we've already seen, but you know, with just the sort of alarm timer stopwatch thing. But in terms of size, what I think is quite surprising is how close this is, the new one is, to the original, or not the original, but certainly one of the most long-standing models in the G-Shock range, which has been around since the 90s. If I get my calipers out here, okay, so I'm going to try and measure this in front of the camera if I can do, and basically we'll look at, say, the diameter first. Okay, so diameter is what watch companies always give to you, and I don't like diameters, but in this case, because it's a square watch, it actually makes some sense. So we're getting around about 43.6 mils there, and in terms of height we are getting 12.6. Now if I go to here, do the same one, so same buttons, 40, let's just get that right on the buttons because I just want to make sure it's absolutely perfect. I'm not giving any incorrect data sort of thing. So 43.4, so with a bit of error, give or take, they're basically identical. And then in terms of height, 13 mils, so very, very minimal difference in terms of height versus the actual height of the other watch that we saw. And then also, if I look at the length now, the length here is 48.3, so fine, you know, really, really good length of a watch. That's actually to the ends of the watch, so not just the actual bezel, but the actual end of the watch where it starts to meet the strap and where the wrist would be, really, where the end of the wrist would be. And then if I do it on this watch, we see there 47.7, so ever so slightly longer, less than a millimeter longer. So that to me is a fantastic thing. They've managed to pack in shed loads more technology into a watch that's barely any different in size to this. So for me, that's a great thing. That's how all companies should look to create watches like the steel one that we see here, because you know, when they start going bigger and massive, I mean, if you take into account, say, this one here, this is a G-Shock Rangeman, currently charging up at the minute because it's been in a sort of safe storage area for a long time, so it's got absolutely no power in it and needs some solar charge. But if you look at this, the size of it, it absolutely dwarfs the new one, you know. So this has got a lot of technology in it itself. It's got altimeters and barometers, it's also got the solar power, but it's not Bluetooth or anything like that. This watch looks a lot more rugged, but it's just much bigger with it, you know. So I only have a small wrist, and I love this watch, and I do still wear it occasionally, but at the same time, it's not a patch on the size of this, but it's a different type of watch. This is more of a outdoorsy sort of watch, which probably appeals with its size to a lot of the people that would use it for those sort of situations, whereas I probably won't do. You also have the other watches here, which we have the Reisman. Those two are actually quite similar, so not masses of difference. This one doesn't have things like compasses or whatever. This is only a twin sensor, not a triple sensor. Maybe that makes some kind of difference, but this is more manageable, but it's a lot lighter and feels a lot cheaper and more plasticky than the steel watch that we have here. So again, this starts, as long as you don't need all these barometer features and things like that, because you probably have it in some other devices anyway now. You know, this watch is still making a lot of sense as a G-Shock. If we then compare it to another classic, now I do have I know that you're already looking at the screen like, what the hell's that? I do have a couple of watches of this sort of scenario. These are based on what's called the DW6900. So that's a DW6900 MS, and that's a DW6900 something else, but it's called a peg leg. So peg leg New York, it's a fashion brand, and basically they did 100 of these, and this is one of those. That's one of my favorite watches, believe it or not. I know I do have taste, I promise you, but I do love this watch. I think it's crazy. Sometimes we need a bit of a crazy watch in our collections. This watch is a DW6900, and this is another classic by Casio. This is another long-standing model now that's been around since the 90s, and even this can sometimes be seen as quite big. So it's really nice that we do have this much shorter lug-to-lug length on this watch, because if you have a smaller wrist like me, it's pretty much in 2018 the only G-Shock that you can truly carry off. A lot of these G-Shocks now are absolutely massive, crazy colourful, forget that, crazy colourful, but at the same time really just huge, and I mean absolutely ridiculously huge, to the point where you have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger to actually be able to wear one on your wrist, because my wrist certainly isn't big enough, and I'm not I don't have the personality, I don't think, to carry off one of these bright pink massive watches. So as a result, you know, this is why another reason, another checkbox for me with this watch. I think it works really well. Now the watch that I am really interested to sort of compare it to though is the Apple Watch, because as much as I hate to say it, the Apple Watch is a very full featured watch. I'm not going to review this right now, but although this has smart features, the Casio, it has nothing in comparison to the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch, however, as standard, has nothing in comparison to the G-Shock in terms of its durability. So I've seen these with cracked screens and all sorts. Now you can buy a case that goes onto the Apple Watch, and it makes it very tough, but whether it makes it as tough as a G-Shock, I don't know. I've not tried either in those sorts of environments, certainly not these two. I've certainly worn G-Shocks in all sorts of environments and never had an issue, and never even worried about having an issue. But the Apple Watch here, the only reason I'm really sort of comparing the two is because this is the 42mm Apple Watch 3 without any sort of SIM card scenario, so no cellular. This is just the Wi-Fi model, and it cost me, I think, £350. This G-Shock here cost me more than that, but it's in the same sort of realm. But if you want functionality and you have an iPhone, then this is probably going to be your best option, the Apple Watch. If you want something that's rugged, that can do little bits with your phone, and sort of you can change settings on it, and you travel a lot maybe, so you want something that's going to be sort of easy to interact with when it comes to world time zones, then I think this still makes a very good decision as an option. However, the G-Shock for me is definitely the winner in terms of sort of cool factor. The Apple Watch, don't get me wrong, I love it. I think it's really good actually. It's been a much bigger success in my watch collection than I ever imagined. I thought I'd buy it and never ever actually wear it. I do wear it, and I find some things fantastic with it. Apple Pay has to be the greatest sort of thing with it. You go and get the tube in London, you just pop this on your pad as you walk through the gates, and you go through. No finding your card, no finding your Oyster card, no finding your tickets that you've just spent a fortune on. And it's actually cheaper, I believe, to go with this, because it's basically like using a contactless card, so it'll actually be cheaper to use a contactless card going through the London tube system. The other day I was out with a friend, I had loads of kit on me, and reaching into my pocket would have been a pain because I was carrying a couple of things. So, you know, it's basically, there's a lot of benefits to the Apple Watch, but there's also, this is a G-Shock, and for me, this is the one that I absolutely adore. So it's not really much of a comparison, but I just wanted to show that these are two watches that are similarly priced, but they're very different watches, and you would choose one for a different scenario. So that's been a look at the GMW-B5000 series of G-Shocks. It's the new 35th anniversary series. There's the gold, there's the steel. I'm sorry it's taken so long in terms of time of the review, but I've gone into everything hopefully, and I'd really like to hear your feedback on it. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel, and please make sure you give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. If you give it 2 thumbs down, that's fine as well. So, but you know, it's fine. The whole point of my reviews is to spark some kind of debate as well. I like to see what your thoughts are on watches. And the other thing as well is, please make sure you check me out on Instagram. I'm at Watch Hobbyist on there. You can see what watches I've got lately. And the other thing as well is, check out my Patreon. Feel free to give me some money for that. These reviews take a long time, and the camera equipment is what I'm really looking to sort of achieve money towards, rather than the actual watches, of course. So thanks for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you again very soon.